Most people spend 40 years getting better at something that was never going to make them free. Not because they weren't talented, not because they didn't work hard, because they were solving the wrong problem the entire time. The problem they were solving: how do I earn more? The problem they should have been solving: how do I own something that earns without me? Those are not the same question. And the distance between them is the distance between a comfortable job and actual freedom. Here's what's true. If your income stops the moment you stop working, you don't have a financial life. You have a financial dependency. You are not building towards something. You are maintaining a relationship with a paycheck. And like most relationships built on dependency, the power belongs to whoever can walk away first. That's usually not you. This audiobook is about the shift, not the motivational version of it. The mechanical version, the one that involves specific decisions, specific assets, and a specific change in how you see money, not as something you earn, but as something you deploy. The wealthy are not smarter. They are not luckier in any statistically meaningful way. What they understand, and what most people are never taught, is that money has two modes. In the first mode, you work and money appears. In the second mode, money works and more money appears. Almost everyone lives in mode 1 their entire lives, not because mode 2 is inaccessible, because nobody explained the door. This is the door. What follows is not a course on getting rich fast. There is no such course worth taking. This is a precise, unsentimental look at how assets are built, what makes them real, and why the gap between those who own and those who earn keeps widening every single year. You already have something to work with. The question is whether you'll use it correctly. Pay attention. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. It's always interesting to see where this reaches. Chapter 1. You were trained to earn, not to own. The paycheck is not a reward. It's a leash with a comfortable grip. Nobody tells you that. They tell you to work hard, show up early, deliver results, and the money will follow. And it does follow. That's the problem. It follows you everywhere. To the grocery store, to the rent payment, to the car note. And the moment you stop moving, it stops coming. That's not freedom. That's a treadmill with a salary attached. Think about what school actually prepared you for. Not ownership, not leverage, not the construction of income systems. It prepared you to be selected, to write a resume that made someone else comfortable enough to hire you, to perform competence in exchange for a monthly deposit. The entire educational architecture was designed to produce capable workers, people who could execute someone else's vision reliably and show up again on Monday. There is nothing wrong with work. Work is how value gets created. But there is something deeply worth examining in the fact that 12+ years of formal education produced almost zero instruction on how money actually multiplies. You learned algebra. You did not learn compounding. You learned to write essays. You did not learn to build an income stream. That omission was not accidental. The economy needs workers more than it needs owners. Owners are inconvenient. They ask different questions. They want equity, not just salary. They think about leverage, not just effort. An economy full of owners is significantly harder to manage than an economy full of employees. So the system optimizes for the latter and calls it education. Here is the uncomfortable truth of this chapter. Most people are one bad month away from financial collapse. Not because they earn too little, because nothing in their financial life works when they stop working. The income and the person are fused. Separate them, and the whole structure falls. Consider the math plainly. A person earning $5,000 a month in active income has built a life around $5,000 a month. The subscriptions, the rent, the car, the food, everything calibrates to that number. Now they get sick, or laid off, or burned out. The $5,000 stops. The expenses do not. Within weeks, the structure begins to crack. Now consider someone earning $3,500 a month in active income and $800 a month from a small rental property, a dividend portfolio, and a digital product they built 2 years ago. They get sick. The $3,500 stops. The $800 does not. It's not enough to live on, but it's enough to survive the gap, enough to avoid desperation, enough to make decisions from a position of something other than panic. That $800 is not just money. It's psychological leverage. It changes the entire negotiation of your life. The difference between those two people is not income. It's architecture. The first person built a salary. The second person built a system. And the system, even a small, imperfect one, carries a different kind of power than any paycheck ever could. Because the system doesn't care if you're tired. It doesn't take days off because you need one. It doesn't get worse because you're going through something difficult. It just keeps moving. That's what ownership does. It decouples your financial output from your physical presence. Now, the employee mindset runs deeper than most people realize. It's not just a work arrangement. It's a psychological orientation. Employees think in terms of time. How many hours is this worth? What's my hourly rate? Am I being paid fairly for what I'm doing? These are not bad questions, but they are the wrong frame. The ownership mindset asks different questions entirely. How many times can this thing pay me? What happens to this income while I sleep? If I stopped touching this tomorrow, what would it produce in a year? Those questions reorganize your entire relationship with money. They move you from thinking about exchange, I give time, I receive money, to thinking about construction. I build something, it runs, it pays. The shift is not complicated, but it is uncomfortable because it requires you to stop waiting for someone to recognize your value and start building something that demonstrates it independently. Leverage is the concept at the center of all of this. Not leverage in the debt sense, not borrowing money you can't afford and hoping the market agrees with you. Leverage in the structural sense, doing more with less, using systems, technology, intellectual property, and ownership to multiply the impact of time already spent. A business owner and an employee can both work 60-hour weeks. At the end of those weeks, the employee has exchanged 60 hours for a fixed amount of money. The business owner has exchanged 60 hours for the construction of something that will continue producing value during the 60 hours of next week and the week after that. The effort looks identical from the outside. The architecture is completely different. This is why wealth compounds in the hands of some people and evaporates in the hands of others. It's not discipline alone. It's not intelligence alone. It's structural orientation. Are you building something that works without you? Or are you the thing that makes it work? The honest answer for most people at the beginning is the latter. And that's fine. You have to start somewhere. But the goal, the actual mechanical goal, is to gradually extract yourself from the center of your own income. To move from being the engine to being the architect. From doing the work to designing the system that does the work. That transition doesn't happen overnight. It happens in layers. First, you build one small thing that earns without you. Then you protect it, improve it, and build another. Then another. Each one is a small act of architectural rebellion against the system that trained you to earn and never taught you to own. Nobody is coming to hand you this transition. There is no employer who will look at you one day and say, "You've been a loyal worker. Now here's a piece of the machine you've been running." That conversation doesn't happen. The machine belongs to whoever built it. And the only way to own a machine is to build one. So you build one. Start where you are, with what you know. With the hours that currently go toward consumption, scrolling, passive entertainment, the comfortable numbness of not having to think about money. Some percentage of that time is the raw material of your first asset. It doesn't require capital. It requires reorientation. The trained worker asks, "What can I do to earn more?" The builder asks, "What can I create that earns without me?" One question leads to a better salary. The other leads to a different life. Both require effort. Only one of them compounds. You are trained to earn. What you do next is your own decision. Chapter 2. The asset isn't what you own. It's what owns itself. A car is not an asset. A rental car, even one car rented 3 days a week at $60 a day, generates $720 a month. That's a different thing entirely. Same object, different function. And function is everything. Most people have been taught to think about assets in terms of possession. What do you own? What's in your name? What shows up on a net worth spreadsheet? But possession is not the same as ownership in any financially meaningful sense. You can possess a $40,000 car that costs you $600 a month in payments, insurance, and maintenance. That car does not put money in your pocket. It takes it. Consistently. Every month. Without apology. That is not an asset. That is a liability wearing an asset's clothing, and it is extraordinarily common. Here is the cleanest definition of an asset you will ever hear. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket whether you're paying attention or not. That's it. No jargon. No accounting terminology. Just a simple cash flow test. Does this thing deposit or withdraw? Apply that test to everything you own. Your home, if you have a mortgage and live in it, is probably withdrawing. Property taxes, maintenance, insurance, the mortgage itself. It may appreciate, and appreciation matters, but appreciation is not cash flow. You cannot spend appreciation until you sell. A home is not an asset until it generates income in excess of its costs. That's the honest version. Your savings account is technically an asset, but at current interest rates, it is barely keeping pace with inflation, which means it is preserving value while quietly losing purchasing power. Better than nothing. Not much better than nothing. Your 401k is an asset, mostly illiquid until a specific age, subject to market volatility, and requiring decades before it performs its real function. Still worth having. Not the whole answer. Now consider what actually qualifies. A rental property generating $400 a month after mortgage and expenses. A dividend stock portfolio paying $150 a quarter and reinvesting automatically. A digital course you built 18 months ago that still sells 11 copies a week. A YouTube channel monetized through advertising, running on content you created 2 years ago. These things put money in your pocket when you are asleep, on vacation, or sitting in a doctor's waiting room. That is the distinction. Not the dollar amount, not the prestige, the direction of cash flow. Most people's financial lives look like a bucket with more holes than faucets. Money comes in through one source, the job, and exits through dozens. Rent, car payment, subscriptions they forgot they had, credit card interest on purchases they don't remember making. The net result is that most households, regardless of income, maintain a near zero financial position month to month. The income looks healthy. The architecture is leaking everywhere. The solution is not to earn more. It is to add faucets and seal holes. Adding a faucet means building or acquiring something that generates cash flow independently. Sealing a hole means auditing every outgoing dollar and asking whether it is serving your financial architecture or draining it. Both actions matter. But the faucet is the one most people ignore, because adding faucets requires construction, and construction is uncomfortable. Here's where middle-class financial thinking creates its most expensive mistake. The middle class is very good at acquiring expensive things: cars, houses, electronics, experiences, all purchased as expressions of success, all functioning as liabilities. The psychological error is not greed, it's misclassification. They genuinely believe these things are assets because they are valuable, because they cost a lot, because other people recognize them as signs of prosperity. But the market does not pay you for your car's resale value while you're driving it. It doesn't deposit funds because your home is in a nice neighborhood. Value and cash flow are not synonyms. A Picasso in a private vault is worth millions and generates zero income. A modest rental in a secondary city might generate $500 a month, every month, indefinitely. Which one is the asset? The answer depends entirely on what you need money to do. If you need it to demonstrate status, buy the Picasso. If you need it to fund your life without your constant labor, build the cash flow. The rich don't spend more than the middle class. They classify differently. They ask a different question before every significant financial decision. Does this put money in my pocket or take it out? Not, can I afford this? Not, do I deserve this? Not, will this make me look successful? Just, in or out. That one question, applied consistently, changes everything, because it forces you to see each dollar as a direction, not just an amount. Now apply this honestly to your current financial life. Run the cash flow test on everything you own. How many things pass? How many things are quietly withdrawing? The results are usually uncomfortable. Most people discover they own almost nothing that qualifies as an asset by this definition, which means most people have been building the appearance of wealth rather than the infrastructure of it. This is not a condemnation, it is a diagnostic. You cannot fix what you haven't named. The fix begins with one decision. Before the next significant purchase, run the test. In or out? If it's out, and most things are, ask whether you need it now or whether that money would serve you better as the beginning of a faucet. Not forever. Not as a religion of deprivation. Just as a reorientation. One faucet, then another. The goal is not to live like a monk. The goal is to eventually own enough faucets that the holes in the bucket stop mattering, that the cash flowing in from assets exceeds the cash flowing out through life, that the gap between income and expenses is generated by ownership, not effort. That gap is freedom, and it starts with knowing the difference between what you possess and what owns itself. Chapter 3. You don't need more money. You need a different relationship with it. Waiting until you have more money to start investing is like waiting until you're fit to start exercising. The logic sounds reasonable. The outcome is identical. You never start. This is the most expensive lie in personal finance, not because it's malicious, because it's comfortable. It lets you off the hook today while sounding financially responsible. I'll invest when I have more to invest. I'll start building when I have something to build with. I'll take this seriously when the numbers get serious. Meanwhile, the numbers that matter most, the compounding ones, the ones that reward time above all else, are running without you. Here is a number worth sitting with. $100 a month, invested consistently in a broad index fund, averaging 8% annual returns over 30 years, produces approximately $150,000. Not from talent, not from timing, from patience and arithmetic. Most people will read that and feel nothing, because $100 feels too small to matter and 30 years feels too far away to be real. That reaction is precisely the problem. The inability to take small numbers seriously in the present tense is the primary reason most people arrive at retirement with less than they needed. Not because they didn't earn enough, because they underestimated what consistency does to small amounts over time. Compounding is not a financial concept. It is a psychological test. It rewards people who can remain committed to something that doesn't feel impressive in the short term. That is a rare skill. And because it's rare, it pays extraordinarily well. The person who invests $100 a month starting at 25 will, in most scenarios, retire with significantly more than the person who invests $500 a month starting at 45. The math is not close. The time is the asset, not the amount. So the question is never, do I have enough to start? The question is, how much time am I willing to waste by not starting? Now let's talk about the relationship most people actually have with money. Because the problem is rarely mathematical, it's behavioral. Most people relate to money emotionally. Money arrives and triggers a feeling, relief, excitement, a sense of permission. That feeling drives behavior. The raise gets spent before it compounds, because spending feels like reward and investing feels like sacrifice. The bonus disappears into a vacation or a purchase, because present pleasure is vivid and future security is abstract. This is not weakness. It's human architecture. The brain is not designed for long-term optimization. It's designed for immediate threat response and short-term reward. The financial system, on the other hand, rewards patience with compounding returns and punishes impatience with opportunity cost. The result is a permanent tension between your biology and your balance sheet. And most people lose that tension repeatedly, not because they lack discipline, but because they've never built structures that remove the decision from the equation entirely. This is why automation is not a convenience. It's a psychological necessity. When you automate your investment, when a fixed amount moves from your account to your index fund on the first of every month before you've touched it, you eliminate the moment of decision. The moment where the emotional brain looks at the money and sees vacation, new phone, comfortable dinner. Automation makes the investment invisible until it's already done. And invisible money compounds without interference. Pay yourself first, not as a motivational slogan, as a literal structural commitment. The money that funds your future goes first. Everything else works around it. This is not about the amount. It is about the sequence. Income arrives. Assets are funded. Life is lived on what remains. Most people do this backwards. Income arrives. Life is lived. Assets are funded with whatever survives. Most months, nothing survives. Lifestyle inflation is the silent mechanism that keeps this cycle locked. You earn more. Life expands to absorb it. The gap between income and expenses stays constant or narrows. The asset column stays thin. And each raise, instead of accelerating freedom, simply funds a more expensive version of the same dependency. The antidote is a deliberate pause between income increases and lifestyle upgrades. When your income rises by $500 a month, direct $300 of that to assets before you feel it. Live on the other $200 improvement. The lifestyle upgrades more slowly. The asset column builds more quickly. Over time, the compounding gap between the two versions of yourself, the one who upgraded immediately and the one who paused, becomes enormous. This does not require deprivation. It requires sequencing. Now, for those who genuinely have very little to work with, and many people do, the path is different, but not absent. When capital is scarce, you substitute time and skill. You build sweat equity assets, things that cost hours, not dollars. A blog that earns $40 a month through affiliate links is a small digital asset. A YouTube channel with 200 subscribers is infrastructure in its infancy. A digital template sold for $15 on an online marketplace is a product that can sell indefinitely. None of these require investment capital. They require creation. The internet has made this specific type of asset building accessible to anyone with basic skills and consistent time. The barrier is not financial. It is attentional. The same hours that most people spend consuming content could, redirected over 12 months, produce content that earns passively. That is not a guarantee, but it is a genuine possibility, and the cost of attempting it is essentially zero. The principle is consistent regardless of income level. You use what you have, capital if you have it, time and skill if you don't, to create something that operates beyond your direct effort. Then you reinvest the first returns. Then you build the second asset. The mechanism scales up from wherever you start. What doesn't scale is waiting. Every month you delay starting is a month the compounding clock doesn't run. That clock does not offer extensions. It does not care about your reasoning. It just rewards whoever started earliest with the most time. Your relationship with money right now is a habit. Habits can be redesigned. You automate the behavior you want and remove the friction from the path you're trying to build. You make investing the default and spending the override rather than the other way around. The amount you start with is almost irrelevant. The structure you build around it is everything. Get the structure right, keep the automation running, and let time do the work that effort alone never could. You don't need more money to begin. You need a different architecture for the money you already have. Chapter 4. Your knowledge is already an asset. You just haven't packaged it. Somewhere right now, someone is paying $200 for a course that teaches exactly what you already know. That's not an exaggeration. The online education market generates billions of dollars annually. The people profiting from it are not universally more intelligent than you. They are not all credentialed experts with decades of institutional authority. Many of them are simply people who looked at what they knew, packaged it clearly, and made it available to people who needed it. The gap between them and you is not knowledge, it's packaging. This is worth examining honestly. Most people significantly underestimate the value of what they know because familiarity breeds invisibility. The thing you've spent 10 years doing feels obvious to you. It feels like common sense, like basic competence, like the floor rather than the ceiling. But to someone who is 5 years behind you on that path, what you know is not obvious at all. It's the answer they've been searching for. And they will pay for clarity they cannot produce themselves. That is a market. You are sitting inside it, unaware that you're standing on something valuable. The question is not whether your knowledge has value. It does. The question is whether you are willing to do the work of translating it into a form that can be exchanged independently of your physical presence. That translation is what separates a skill from an asset. A skill requires you. Every time someone needs the thing you can do, you must show up and do it. You exchange time. You receive money. The transaction closes. The next transaction requires you again, and the one after that. The income is real, but it is fundamentally linear. Your earning capacity is bounded by your available hours, and your available hours are fixed. An asset does not require you. It runs on what you built. A course you recorded in your spare bedroom 3 years ago can sell to someone in a different time zone at 2 a.m. while you're asleep. It delivers the same value, generates the same income, and demands nothing from you in that moment. The work was done once. The returns continue. That is leverage, and it begins with packaging. How do you package knowledge into an asset? Start with the specific problem you solve, not the general topic you understand. The specific, concrete problem someone comes to you with. The more precise your problem, the more willing people are to pay for its solution. Broad expertise is everywhere. Specific answers to specific problems are rare and therefore valuable. A fitness trainer who helps people generally might earn a modest income. The same trainer who specifically helps sedentary office workers over 50 rebuild mobility without joint pain has found an underserved, motivated audience willing to pay premium rates for a solution tailored precisely to them. Same foundational knowledge, different packaging, dramatically different economics. Once you know the problem you solve, you choose the format. And here, the digital economy gives you options that simply did not exist 20 years ago. An online course is the most scalable format. You record lessons, structure them logically, upload them to a platform, and sell access repeatedly. The marginal cost of serving the 1,000th student is essentially zero. A well-constructed course at $97 sold to 300 people generates just under $30,000. One-time creation, indefinite sales. That is not a job. That is an asset. If recording video feels like too large a commitment, start with a written guide or ebook, a 30-page document that solves a specific problem clearly, priced at $19, sold through a simple sales page, is a digital asset. It does not require a publisher. It does not require a literary agent. It requires that you know something useful and communicate it well enough that people will exchange money for it. Templates, frameworks, and tools are another category. If you have developed a system for doing something, a spreadsheet, a planning template, a decision-making framework, that system can be sold directly. Designers sell templates for hundreds of dollars because a well-designed template saves the buyer hours of work. The buyer is not paying for the file. They are paying for the time and expertise embedded in it. The key insight across all of these formats is this: you are not selling information. Information is free and abundant. You are selling clarity, structure, and the elimination of the learning curve you already climbed. The buyer pays to skip the 10 years it took you to figure this out. That is not a trivial service. That is an enormous value. Now, the asset becomes more powerful when it is attached to a personal brand. And this is where most people stall, because personal brand sounds like performing for an audience, which sounds uncomfortable, which means most people never do it. But a personal brand is not a performance. It is a consistent demonstration of your perspective and expertise over time. It is the record of how you think about the problems you solve, and it compounds in a way that paid advertising does not. When you consistently share your perspective through writing, video, audio, or teaching, you build credibility with an audience. That credibility converts into trust, and trust in the digital economy is the primary currency. People do not buy from the most qualified. They buy from whoever they trust most. And trust is built through consistent, honest demonstration of how you think. Think of your content as compound interest on your reputation. Each piece of content adds a small increment. A blog post that gets 12 readers today might get discovered by 12,000 readers in 2 years. A video that earns 40 views in its first week might accumulate 4,000 views over the following 18 months. The returns are not immediate, but they do not expire either. Unlike a salary, your content does not stop paying you when you stop producing it. The email list is where this becomes financially concrete. Social media followers are not an asset. The platform owns that relationship. They can change the algorithm, reduce your reach, or disappear entirely, and there is nothing you can do about it. An email list, however, is yours. You own the relationship. When you send an email, it lands in someone's inbox regardless of any algorithm. That direct access to an audience of people who specifically chose to hear from you is a genuine, valuable, owned asset. Even a modest email list of 2,000 engaged subscribers can generate meaningful, recurring income through product launches, affiliate partnerships, or direct offers. The list is the asset. The content is what builds it. This entire architecture, the packaged knowledge, the personal brand, the owned audience, does not require a team or significant capital. It requires time, consistency, and the willingness to start before it feels ready, which it will not. Ever. Readiness is a feeling that arrives after you've started, not before. The uncomfortable truth is this: you are not undervalued. You are underpackaged. There is a meaningful difference. Being undervalued means the market doesn't recognize what you're worth. Being underpackaged means you've never presented it in a form the market can easily purchase. The market is not obligated to find you. You have to show up in a format it can use. Package what you know. Make it specific. Price it honestly. Distribute it consistently. Then let it run while you build the next one. Your knowledge has been working for your employer for years. It is time for it to work for you. Chapter 5. Attention is real estate. Most people are renting on someone else's platform. Your social media audience isn't yours. The platform owns the land. You're just a tenant. This is not a metaphor. It is the precise legal and operational reality of every follower count, every subscriber number, every engagement metric you've spent months or years accumulating. The platform built the infrastructure. The platform sets the rules. The platform decides, at any moment, how many of your own followers actually see what you post. And the platform can, without notice, change all of that, or remove you entirely. You have no lease. You have no recourse. You have a number on a screen that belongs to someone else's database. This matters enormously when you start thinking about digital assets seriously. Because there is a fundamental difference between building an audience and building an asset. An audience on someone else's platform is rented attention. An owned channel, an email list, a website, a podcast with a direct RSS feed is owned attention. And the difference between renting and owning, as this entire audiobook keeps returning to, is the difference between dependency and freedom. Let's make this concrete. A creator with 100,000 Instagram followers and no email list is, financially, in a fragile position. When they post, the algorithm decides how many followers see it. On a good day, maybe 5%. On a bad day, less. If Instagram changes its monetization policies, their income changes. If the account gets flagged or suspended, their entire audience relationship disappears overnight. They cannot contact their followers directly. They cannot bring them to a new platform without starting over. They are entirely at the mercy of a corporation whose interests are not aligned with theirs. Now consider a creator with 8,000 email subscribers. When they send an email, it reaches 8,000 inboxes. Open rates vary, but the relationship is direct. No algorithm filters it. No platform can suppress it. If one email service provider shuts them down, they export the list and move it somewhere else in an afternoon. The audience travels with them because the audience relationship belongs to them, not to a third party. Which position would you rather be in? The first creator has a larger number. The second creator has an actual asset. This is the attention economy's central deception. It rewards you with visible metrics, followers, views, likes, that feel like progress and function like dependency. You grow your following and simultaneously grow your reliance on the platform's goodwill. The metrics go up. The ownership stays at zero. The solution is not to abandon social media. It is to treat social media as a pipeline, not a destination. Every piece of content you distribute on a platform should be designed to move interested people towards something you own. A blog post, an email list, a podcast, a website that you control. The platform is the funnel entrance. Your owned infrastructure is where the asset lives. An email list converts at roughly 10 times the rate of social media for product sales and direct offers. That ratio holds consistently across industries. 10,000 engaged email subscribers will generate more revenue than 100,000 social followers who have no direct relationship with you. The numbers look less impressive from the outside. The financial results are dramatically better. Building an email list does not require a large existing audience. It requires a clear value proposition and a specific reason for someone to give you their email address. That reason is usually a free resource, a guide, a template, a short course, a piece of analysis that solves a specific problem well enough that people are willing to exchange contact information for it. That exchange is the beginning of an owned relationship. From there, the asset is built through consistency. Regular emails that deliver genuine value, insight, education, entertainment, perspective, deepen the relationship over time. The subscriber who has been reading your emails for 18 months trusts you at a level that no algorithmic recommendation can replicate. That trust is the economic foundation of everything you sell, recommend, or create. Your website operates on the same ownership principle. A website you own and control is a permanent digital address. It is indexed by search engines, which means content you publish today can attract new readers 3 years from now without any additional effort from you. A well-written article answering a specific question can generate consistent organic traffic for years. That traffic, directed toward an email opt-in or a product, compounds quietly in the background while you do other things. This is what search engine optimization actually means when stripped of its technical jargon. You are creating content that answers questions people are already asking. When someone searches for that answer, they find you. They arrive already interested. That is an extraordinarily efficient form of attention acquisition. And unlike paid advertising, it doesn't stop working the moment you stop paying for it. The contrast with paid advertising is worth understanding clearly. Paid advertising rents attention. The moment you stop paying, the attention disappears. It is a faucet, not a well. Effective for testing, useful for scaling something that already works, but fundamentally not an asset. The organic search traffic generated by a well-maintained website is structurally different. It compounds. New content adds to the existing body of work. Authority builds over time. Ranking improves. Traffic grows. And none of it requires a daily budget. Intellectual property operates on the same logic. A book you write, a framework you develop, a methodology you name and document, these are owned assets that exist independently of any platform. They can be licensed, sold, cited, referenced, and built upon without your constant involvement. The author who wrote a useful book in 2019 is still receiving royalties and credibility from that work today. The influencer who had 200,000 followers on a platform that has since declined is starting over. Time always reveals the difference between rented and owned. Now, there is a practical sequence to building owned digital infrastructure that most people miss because they try to build everything at once and build nothing properly. The sequence is create, capture, nurture, convert. You create content that attracts attention on whatever platform is most relevant to your audience. You capture that attention by directing interested people to an owned channel, typically email. You nurture that relationship by delivering consistent value over time. You convert that trust into income by offering something worth paying for. Each step must be in place for the system to work. Creators who only create but never capture build audiences on borrowed land indefinitely. Creators who capture but never nurture have email lists of people who forgot why they signed up. Creators who try to convert without nurturing have low conversion rates and wonder why. The system works when all 4 steps are functioning and connected. At that point, it runs largely on its own. New content enters the top of the pipeline. Subscribers move through the nurture sequence automatically. Products sell while you sleep. The owned infrastructure does the work. This is not a complicated system, but it requires building things you own rather than optimizing things someone else owns. It requires the discipline to care more about your email list than your follower count, even when the follower count is the number that gets social recognition. The uncomfortable truth here is that most people will optimize for the metric that other people can see. Follower counts are visible. Email list sizes are not. Engagement rates are public. Conversion rates are private. The metrics that impress other people and the metrics that build actual wealth are almost never the same metrics. The wealthy builder tracks the invisible numbers: list size, open rate, conversion rate, revenue per subscriber. These are the numbers that determine whether the digital infrastructure is working. Everything else is vanity dressed as progress. Real estate in physical space is valuable because it is scarce, permanent, and owned. Digital real estate, your list, your site, your intellectual property, operates on the same principles. It is yours. It is permanent until you decide otherwise. And in a world where attention is the most valuable resource in the economy, owning a direct relationship with an audience of people who chose you is not a small thing. Stop building on rented land. Start building what no one can take from you. The platform will be fine without your content. The question is whether you'll be fine without the platform. Chapter 6. Real estate doesn't have to mean a mansion. It has to mean ownership. The first property doesn't have to be impressive. It has to cash flow. Most people eliminate real estate as a possibility before they've examined it seriously. They picture a down payment they don't have, a mortgage they can't qualify for, a management burden they don't want, and a risk they can't afford. And they're not entirely wrong about those obstacles, but they're describing the obstacles of buying the wrong property in the wrong way for the wrong reasons. The right property in the right market, acquired with a clear financial objective, is one of the most reliable wealth-building mechanisms that ordinary people have ever had access to. Not because real estate is glamorous, because it is slow, predictable, and leveraged in a way that no other accessible asset class quite matches. Here is the core mechanic, stated plainly. You find a property that generates more income than it costs to hold. A modest two-bedroom house in a secondary city, purchased for $150,000 with a 20% down payment, might carry a mortgage payment of $700 a month. If the local rental market supports $1,200 a month in rent, you have $500 a month in gross cash flow before taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Net that down conservatively, and you might clear $200 to $300 a month. That doesn't sound transformative, but consider the full picture. The tenant is paying down your mortgage every month. The property is appreciating, historically, in line with or ahead of inflation. You invested $30,000 to acquire an asset worth $150,000, a 5-to-1 leverage ratio that no index fund can legally offer you. And the $200 to $300 monthly cash flow is arriving whether you are actively working or not. Over 10 years, that property has been paid down by the tenant, appreciated in value, and generated tens of thousands in cumulative cash flow. You didn't build that with a salary. You built it with ownership and time. That is the real estate argument, stripped of the hype. Now, the objection most people reach for immediately is the down payment. Where does $30,000 come from when most households are living paycheck to paycheck? This is a real constraint, and it deserves a real answer rather than the motivational handwave most personal finance content provides. The honest answer has several parts. First, the down payment can be smaller than 20%. FHA loans allow entry at 3.5% for primary residences, which means house hacking becomes a viable strategy. Buying a multi-unit property, living in one unit, and renting the others to offset or eliminate your own housing cost while building equity. You are effectively being paid to acquire your first asset. Second, real estate investment trusts, REITs, have democratized access to real estate income at a fraction of the entry cost. A REIT is a company that owns income-producing real estate and is legally required to distribute at least 90% of its taxable income to shareholders. You can buy shares in a REIT for the price of a single stock. You receive dividend income from a diversified portfolio of properties without managing a single tenant, fixing a single toilet, or making a single mortgage payment. It is not identical to direct ownership, but it is real estate income from a $500 investment. Third, fractional real estate platforms now allow investors to purchase partial ownership in specific properties for as little as $100. These platforms handle all management and distribute rental income proportionally. The yield is modest and the liquidity is limited, but the principle is sound. You are accumulating ownership in income-producing real estate from a genuinely accessible entry point. The path to the first full property begins with one of these smaller entry points, combined with a deliberate savings strategy and the patience to wait for the right deal rather than the convenient one. Most people who fail at real estate fail not because the market was bad, but because they bought the wrong property, one that felt good emotionally and performed poorly financially. The discipline of real estate investing is the discipline of the numbers, not the neighborhood aesthetics, not the architectural charm, not the feeling you get when you walk through the front door. The numbers. Does this property, at this price, in this market, generate positive cash flow after all expenses? If yes, it is worth examining. If no, it is a liability with a nicer coat on. There is one aspect of real estate that distinguishes it from almost every other asset class, and it doesn't get discussed enough. It is the relationship between real estate and inflation. Inflation erodes the purchasing power of cash. A dollar saved today buys less in 10 years. Most people fear inflation for this reason. It makes saving feel futile. But for the real estate investor, inflation is largely a friend. As prices rise, so does the value of your property. As prices rise, so does the rent you can charge. But your fixed-rate mortgage payment stays exactly the same. This means that over time, inflation does two things simultaneously. It increases your asset's value, and it decreases the real cost of your debt. The tenant pays rent that rises with inflation. Your mortgage payment stays fixed. The gap between the two, your cash flow, expands automatically. You didn't do anything. Inflation did it for you. This is why experienced real estate investors do not fear inflation the way cash savers do. They are positioned on the right side of it. The management burden is real and worth addressing honestly. Owning rental property involves tenants, maintenance, vacancies, and administrative work. These are genuine costs of time, money, and occasionally emotional energy. The solution is not to pretend these costs don't exist. It is to account for them in your numbers before you buy, and to systematize the management once you own. Property management companies typically charge 8 to 12% of monthly rent to handle all tenant interaction, maintenance coordination, and administrative work. On a property generating $1,200 a month, that is $120 to $144. If that expense makes the property's cash flow negative, the numbers didn't work in the first place. If it still cash flows after management fees, you own a largely passive income asset. The cost of not managing it yourself is built into the deal from the beginning. The mindset shift that makes real estate accessible is the same shift this entire audiobook is building toward. Stop thinking about real estate as a purchase and start thinking about it as an acquisition. You are not buying a place. You are acquiring an income stream wrapped in a physical structure. The structure is not the point. The income stream is. When you look at properties through that lens, the emotional appeal of beautiful homes becomes less relevant, and the financial performance of modest ones becomes more interesting. The property that cash flows $300 a month in an unremarkable neighborhood is a better asset than the property that barely breaks even in a desirable one. Own things that pay you. Start smaller than you think you should. Let the tenant fund the asset, while time and inflation do the rest. Real estate built more ordinary millionaires than any other asset class in history. Not because it's exciting, because it's patient and structural, and it rewards people who understand that ownership compounds in ways that renting of property or of someone else's platform never will. Chapter 7. Gold doesn't grow, but it doesn't disappear either. Gold is boring. That's the point. If you are looking for excitement in your investment portfolio, gold will disappoint you consistently. It pays no dividend. It generates no rent. It does not compound. It sits there, dense and indifferent, while the rest of the financial world performs its theater of growth and collapse and recovery and collapse again. And that is precisely what makes it useful. Most investors think about their portfolio exclusively in terms of growth. What will produce the highest return? What will compound fastest? What will make the number go up most dramatically over time? These are reasonable questions, but they represent only one dimension of wealth building. The other dimension, the one most people ignore until a crisis reminds them it exists, is preservation. Wealth has two enemies. The first is loss, the second is inflation. Growth assets address the first enemy by producing returns that outpace decline. Gold addresses the second enemy by holding value when the currency measuring everything else is quietly losing its purchasing power. Consider what inflation actually does. Every year, the central bank's monetary policy and broader economic forces combine to reduce the purchasing power of the dollar by some percentage. In moderate years, that's 2 to 3%. In inflationary periods, significantly more. This means that cash sitting in a standard savings account is not stable. It is slowly declining in real value. The number stays the same. The purchasing power does not. Gold has historically maintained its purchasing power across centuries. An ounce of gold in ancient Rome could purchase a quality toga, leather sandals, and a belt. An ounce of gold today purchases a quality suit, leather shoes, and a belt. The nominal price has changed dramatically. The real purchasing power has remained remarkably stable across 2,000 years of monetary experiments, currency collapses, and geopolitical upheaval. That is not growth. That is preservation, and preservation has a specific, irreplaceable role in a portfolio built for the long term. Here is how to think about gold's function correctly. It is not an investment in the traditional sense. It is an insurance policy. You do not buy insurance because you expect it to outperform your stock portfolio. You buy it because when things go wrong, when the market collapses, when inflation surges, when geopolitical instability shakes confidence in paper assets, the insurance does something the rest of your portfolio cannot. It holds. During the 2008 financial crisis, equity markets lost approximately 50% of their value. Gold increased in price by roughly 25% over the same period. During the inflationary surge following 2020, gold performed significantly better than cash and bonds. These are not coincidences. Gold moves counter-cyclically to risk assets precisely because it is sought as a refuge when confidence in paper systems erodes. You want something in your portfolio that behaves differently from everything else. Not because it will make you rich, but because it will prevent the rest of your assets from being decimated in the moments when everything is falling simultaneously. The portfolio that contains only growth assets is a portfolio that performs brilliantly in good times and catastrophically in bad ones. The investor who cannot survive a bad time long enough to reach the recovery does not benefit from the recovery. Gold's role is to smooth that experience, to provide stability when the growth assets are under pressure, so that the growth assets are not liquidated at the worst possible moment. This is a behavioral point as much as a financial one. Most investment losses are not caused by permanent market decline. They are caused by investors selling at the bottom because they panic. The panic is caused by watching a portfolio decline sharply with no stabilizing element present. Gold and other non-correlated assets reduces the severity of that decline, which reduces the psychological pressure to sell, which means the growth assets are held through the recovery. The gold position is buying you the emotional capacity to stay invested. Now, how much gold belongs in a portfolio? The common institutional recommendation falls between 5 and 15% of total investable assets. The exact figure depends on your risk tolerance, time horizon, and the degree of inflation exposure in your economy. But the principle is consistent. A small, maintained allocation to gold provides meaningful protection at minimal opportunity cost. If you hold 10% of your portfolio in gold, and gold delivers modest returns, while your equities compound at 8%, you have sacrificed some return on 10% of your money in exchange for portfolio stability and inflation protection. That is not a mistake. That is a considered trade-off made by sophisticated institutional investors and sovereign wealth funds around the world. How you hold gold matters. Physical gold, coins or bars stored in a secure location, is the purest form of ownership. It has no counterparty risk. It does not depend on a financial institution remaining solvent. It exists independently of any system. There is a reason central banks hold physical gold rather than gold-linked financial products. When the system is the thing that might fail, you want assets that exist outside the system. For most individual investors, physical gold is one component of the allocation, supplemented by gold ETFs, exchange-traded funds that hold physical gold and can be bought and sold like stocks. ETFs provide liquidity and fractional exposure without the logistics of storing physical metal. They carry minimal counterparty risk and track the gold price closely. Gold mining stocks are a different instrument. They offer leveraged exposure to gold prices, but introduce company-specific risk. Management quality, operational efficiency, geopolitical risk of mining locations. They behave more like equities than like gold. They belong in a different part of the portfolio, if at all. The uncomfortable truth of this chapter is one that growth-oriented investors resist. The market does not always go up. History is full of extended periods, a decade or longer, where equity markets delivered flat or negative real returns after adjusting for inflation. Japan's equity market spent 30 years below its 1989 peak. These are not fringe scenarios. They are historical facts that most financial optimism quietly steps around. The investor who holds only growth assets and enters one of these periods near the end of their accumulation phase faces a genuinely difficult situation. The recovery may come, but it may come too late to be useful. Gold does not solve this problem entirely, but it mitigates it meaningfully. Boring assets have a reputation problem. In a financial culture that celebrates massive returns, asymmetric bets, and the thrill of riding a trend to its peak, patience and preservation feel like failure. They are not failure. They are the foundation that allows everything else to be held through volatility without being abandoned. Build for growth. Protect what you build. Those are not competing objectives. They are sequential obligations. Gold doesn't grow, but it doesn't disappear either. And in a world where disappearing is a genuine possibility for almost everything else you own, that is worth more than most people give it credit for. Not exciting, just reliable. In a long financial life, reliable is underrated. Chapter 8. Dividends are proof of ownership. Wages are proof of labor. The dividend is the market's way of saying, you own a piece of this, not a piece of the price action, not a speculative claim on future growth, an actual contractual share of the profits generated by a real business operating in the real economy. Every quarter, the company counts what it earned, sets aside what it needs, and distributes the rest to the people who own it. You are one of those people. The money arrives in your account. You did nothing to earn it that week. That is a fundamentally different relationship with income than the one most people have ever experienced. Most people have only ever received wages. Wages are clean, predictable, and psychologically comfortable. You work, the money comes. The exchange feels fair because it is explicit. But wages carry an invisible clause that most people never examine. They stop the moment you do. The wage is not proof that you own anything. It is proof that you showed up and performed. Stop showing up, stop performing, and the proof disappears. The dividend has no such clause. The dividend arrives because you hold the asset. Whether you worked that week or not, whether you were productive or not, whether you were even paying attention to the market or not. Ownership pays independently of your behavior. That is not a minor distinction. It is the entire architecture of financial independence. Let's ground this in numbers that are accessible rather than aspirational. A portfolio of $50,000 invested in dividend-paying stocks at an average yield of 4% generates $2,000 per year, roughly $166 per month, without touching the principal. That number will not replace a salary, but it will pay a utility bill, a phone bill, or a modest grocery run every single month, forever, without requiring any additional labor. Now consider what happens when you reinvest those dividends rather than spending them. The $2,000 annual dividend buys additional shares. Those shares generate additional dividends. Those dividends buy more shares. The process is self-amplifying. After 10 years of consistent reinvestment, the portfolio has not merely grown by 4% annually from dividends alone. It has grown by the compounded interaction of dividend income, share appreciation, and reinvestment. The snowball does not roll at a constant pace. It accelerates. This is why dividend investing rewards the patient and punishes the impatient with particular severity. The early years look unimpressive. The returns feel too slow to matter. Most people sell too soon, often exactly when they should be buying more, and exit the compounding cycle before it has time to become remarkable. Here is the behavior pattern that destroys dividend wealth most consistently. The market declines. The portfolio value drops visually. The number on the screen gets smaller. The investor, conditioned to measure success by price appreciation, experiences this as loss and sells. But here is what actually happened. The companies in the portfolio continued operating. They continued generating revenue. Many of them continued paying dividends. The business did not change. The price of owning a piece of it temporarily declined. The sophisticated dividend investor understands something the frightened investor does not. A price decline in a fundamentally sound dividend-paying company is not a loss. It is a sale. The same dividend yield now comes attached to a cheaper share price, which means each dollar reinvested buys more ownership, which means the future dividend income per dollar invested has increased. This is backwards from how most people think about falling prices. In every other area of life, people prefer lower prices. They wait for sales. They celebrate discounts. In the stock market, they panic when prices fall and celebrate when they rise, even though rising prices mean you are paying more for the same ownership. The emotional circuitry runs exactly opposite to rational behavior, which is why most individual investors underperform the market, despite the market doing most of the work automatically. Dividend investing corrects this behavioral problem by shifting your focus from price to income. You are not watching the price. You are watching the dividend. Is it maintained? Is it growing? Has the company reduced or eliminated it? Price is noise. Dividend history is signal. A company that has paid and grown its dividend for 25 consecutive years, through recessions, financial crises, and global disruptions, is demonstrating something about its business quality that no short-term price movement can contradict. These companies exist. They are not exotic or inaccessible. Consumer staples, utilities, healthcare, financial services, industries that produce things people need regardless of economic conditions, tend to generate the stable, consistent cash flows from which reliable dividends are paid. You do not need to identify the next high-growth technology disruptor. You need to own pieces of businesses that people will continue using, whether the economy is growing or contracting. The dividend aristocrats, companies that have increased their dividend for at least 25 consecutive years, include businesses whose products are in your home right now. These companies survived every recession of the last quarter century, every market crash, every geopolitical disruption, and continued paying and growing their dividends throughout. That track record is not luck. It is evidence of durable business quality. Now, the yield matters less than the yield on cost over time. This is a concept that confuses most new investors and rewards those who grasp it early. When you buy a stock at $40 that pays a $1.60 annual dividend, the yield is 4%. If the company grows its dividend by 7% annually, a reasonable growth rate for a quality dividend grower, 10 years later, the annual dividend payment is approximately $3.15 per share. But you paid $40 per share. Your yield on your original cost is now nearly 8%. The income has doubled without you investing another dollar. This is the mechanism that turns a modest starting investment into a genuinely significant income stream over time. Not because the market rewarded speculation, but because consistent ownership of quality businesses compounds quietly and relentlessly. The starting amount is less important than most people believe. Beginning with $5,000 rather than $50,000 means starting smaller, not starting wrongly. The mechanism is identical. The timeline is longer. The outcome, an income stream that grows independent of your labor, is the same. What changes the outcome most dramatically is not the starting amount. It is how long you stay invested and whether you reinvest consistently. There is one more layer to dividend investing that most conversations omit. Dividends function as a discipline mechanism for corporate management. A company committed to paying and growing a dividend cannot easily hide poor performance behind accounting adjustments or forward-looking projections. Cash is either available to distribute or it is not. The dividend is a real-time accountability tool. A company that cuts its dividend is announcing, in the clearest possible language, that the underlying business is under genuine pressure. For the investor, this means dividend history is a remarkably efficient screening tool. It filters out the companies whose profitability exists primarily in presentations and projections, rather than actual cash generation. You are not relying on management optimism. You are relying on their demonstrated ability to produce distributable cash consistently across multiple economic cycles. Wages prove you worked. Dividends prove you own something that works. The goal is to accumulate enough ownership that the income from that ownership covers a meaningful portion of your life's expenses. Not all at once, not immediately, but incrementally, month by month, reinvestment by reinvestment, until one day, the income from assets exceeds what you need from labor. At that point, the wage becomes optional. The dividend became the proof of something more permanent than employment. It became the proof of a different kind of life, one where showing up is a choice rather than a requirement. Start with whatever you have. Automate the reinvestment, ignore the price, watch the income. That is the discipline. And that discipline, maintained long enough, produces freedom with the same reliability that neglecting it produces dependency. Chapter 9. Automation is not the future. It's the mechanism. Every manual process you haven't automated is a job you've assigned to yourself indefinitely. Think about that with some precision. Every time you manually send a follow-up email, you are doing a job that a system could do better, faster, and without forgetting. Every time you manually process a payment, fulfill an order, or respond to a frequently asked question, you are inserting yourself into a process that does not require you. And every process that requires you is a process that stops when you stop. That is not an asset. That is a job you built yourself and titled differently. The distinction between a business and a job you own is exactly this. A business operates without your constant presence. A job, even one you created, even one you run independently, requires you to show up or the output stops. Most self-employed people have built a job, not a business. Most online creators have built a content habit, not a content system. The revenue feels like business income. The dependency feels like employment. Automation is the mechanism that converts one into the other. This is not a technology conversation. It is a systems conversation. Automation precedes technology. It is the discipline of designing processes so they execute consistently without requiring a human decision at each step. Technology simply makes that design cheaper, faster, and more scalable than it has ever been. Consider what automation actually means in practical terms for someone building income assets. You have a digital product, a course, an ebook, a template. Someone discovers it through a search or a social media post, visits your sales page, decides to purchase, pays, and receives the product. In a manual operation, you are involved in multiple steps of that chain. In an automated operation, you are involved in none of them. The entire sequence, discovery, consideration, purchase, delivery, receipt, executes without your knowledge, let alone your intervention. That single automated sequence, running on a product you built once, is the closest thing to genuinely passive income that the digital economy offers. It is not fully passive. The product required creation, the sales page required writing, the delivery system required setup, and the entire operation requires periodic maintenance. But once built and functioning, it operates at a ratio of output to input that no manual process can approach. The economic logic is straightforward. A manual process can handle roughly as many transactions as you have hours. An automated process can handle as many transactions as your infrastructure supports. One is bounded by your biology. The other is bounded only by demand and server capacity. The scalability gap between those two ceilings is where digital wealth is generated. Now, most people understand this in theory and still fail to build it in practice. The reason is almost always the same. They confuse being busy with building systems. They spend their time doing the work rather than designing the process. They are so occupied with execution that they never create the infrastructure that would make constant execution unnecessary. This is the trap of competence. The more skilled you are at doing something, the more in demand your doing of it becomes, and the less time you have to step back and engineer the system that could do it without you. The most capable people are often the most trapped, because their skill makes them irreplaceable, and being irreplaceable is, structurally, the opposite of being free. The exit from this trap requires a deliberate, temporary reduction in output to invest in system design. You spend less time doing the thing and more time building the infrastructure that will do the thing. This feels counterproductive. Revenue may dip briefly. Clients may notice your reduced availability. The discomfort is real. But on the other side of that discomfort is a process that runs without you and that changes the economics of everything. Let's be specific about what automation looks like at the practical level for someone building income assets. Email marketing automation is the most accessible and highest return example. When someone joins your email list, an automated sequence delivers a series of emails over days or weeks, introducing your perspective, providing genuine value, building trust, and eventually presenting an offer. This sequence runs identically for every new subscriber, regardless of when they join, regardless of what you are doing at that moment. A well-constructed email sequence, delivering real value and making an honest offer at the right moment, can convert a meaningful percentage of new subscribers into paying customers without any direct involvement from you. The sequence was written once. It runs continuously. It scales to any list size without additional effort. Sales funnels operate on the same principle. A landing page captures attention. A sales page presents the offer. A payment processor handles the transaction. A delivery system sends the product. A post-purchase sequence handles onboarding and support. Each component connects to the next automatically. The customer moves through the entire experience without you touching a single step. Customer service automation handles the questions that repeat. Every business has a set of questions that customers ask consistently. What is the refund policy? How do I access the product? How do I reset my login? These questions, answered manually, consume hours every week. Answered through an automated FAQ system, a chatbot, or a well-structured help center, they consume none of your time and still provide the customer with an accurate, immediate response. Scheduling automation removes the coordination overhead of booking calls, consultations, or sessions. You set your available hours once. The system allows people to book within those hours automatically. Confirmation emails, reminders, and follow-ups are sent without your involvement. The meeting appears on your calendar. The coordination that previously required multiple email exchanges has been reduced to a single link. Payment and invoicing automation ensures that revenue collection does not depend on your memory or your availability. Recurring subscriptions are charged automatically. Invoices are generated and sent on schedule. Payment failures trigger automated follow-up sequences. The revenue infrastructure functions independently of your attention. Each of these systems individually saves modest amounts of time. Collectively, they transform the operational burden of running an income-producing asset from a part-time job into a periodic maintenance task. The difference in time demand is not incremental, it is categorical. But here is the piece that most automation conversations miss. The most important thing to automate is your investment behavior. Not your email marketing, not your sales funnel, your investment. The investor who manually decides each month whether to invest and how much and in what is exposing their wealth-building process to their own emotional state. On a good month, they invest. On a bad month, a stressful month, an expensive month, a month where the market looks frightening, they don't. The inconsistency is not a character flaw. It is a predictable consequence of removing structure from a decision that benefits from structure. Automated investment, a fixed amount moving from your account to your index fund or dividend portfolio on the same date every month, without any required action from you, removes the decision from the emotional brain entirely. The investment happens on the good months and the bad months with equal reliability. The compounding runs without interruption. The wealth builds without requiring your active participation beyond the initial setup. This is the automation that matters most. Not because the technology is impressive, but because consistent investing over decades produces results that inconsistent investing over the same period simply cannot match. The uncomfortable truth of this chapter is that most people are manually performing processes that should have been systematized long ago. They are doing repetitive work that a well-designed system would handle automatically. And each hour spent doing that work is an hour not spent building the next asset, refining the next system, or simply living the life the asset was supposed to fund. The mechanism is not complicated. Map the repeating process, design the system, implement it, test it, maintain it periodically, then redirect the reclaimed time toward building the next thing. Every automated system you build is a permanent expansion of your effective capacity. It does not get tired. It does not take days off. It does not make emotionally driven decisions. It simply executes the process you designed, at whatever scale demand requires. Busy is not productive. Systematic is productive. Build once. Let it run. Counter 10. Protect what you built before you lose it to a technicality. More wealth has been lost to poor structure than to bad investment. That sentence deserves a moment. Not to bad luck, not to market crashes, not to economic recessions or geopolitical disruptions. To poor structure. to the absence of basic legal and financial architecture around assets that took years to build, to the assumption that building the asset was the hard part and that protecting it could wait until later. Later has a way of arriving as a crisis rather than a calendar item. The wealthy do not protect their assets because they are paranoid. They protect them because they understand that wealth without structure is wealth exposed to every form of risk simultaneously: lawsuit, tax inefficiency, estate confusion, business failure, personal liability, and the general chaos that follows when a well-meaning but structurally unprotected financial life encounters the real world. Structure is not complicated, but it is deliberate. And most people never get deliberate about it until something goes wrong. Start with the most common and most consequential structural failure: the absence of separation between personal and business finances. A person who runs an online business, owns a rental property, or generates income from any source outside of traditional employment is operating with some level of business exposure. If that exposure is held in their personal name, if the business is effectively indistinguishable from the individual legally and financially, then every risk the business carries is also a personal risk. A tenant who is injured on your rental property and sues does not sue the property. They sue the owner. If the property is held in your personal name, they are suing you. Your bank accounts, your other assets, your car, your savings, all of it sits inside the blast radius of that lawsuit. If the property is held in a properly structured LLC, a limited liability company, the lawsuit is contained. The LLC's assets are exposed. Your personal assets are not. This is not a sophisticated legal maneuver. It is a basic structural decision that takes a few $100s and a few hours to establish. The cost of not doing it, in the scenario where something goes wrong, is potentially everything you have built. The same logic applies to online businesses. A digital product business generating $10,000 a month is a meaningful asset. Run under your personal name with no corporate structure, it is also a meaningful liability. Customer disputes, intellectual property claims, payment processor freezes, any of these can create financial and legal exposure that reaches into your personal finances if no structural wall separates the two. An LLC, an S corporation, or another appropriate entity, chosen based on your specific situation and jurisdiction, creates that wall. Everything inside the entity is exposed to the entity's risks. Everything outside it remains protected. The wall is not impenetrable, but it is real. And in most ordinary dispute scenarios, it does exactly what it is designed to do. Tax structure is the second layer of protection that most people address far too late. The tax code is not a punishment. It is a set of rules with legitimate legal pathways designed to encourage specific economic behaviors: investment, business formation, real estate ownership, retirement savings. The wealthy use these pathways, not through evasion, which is illegal, but through literacy, which is simply understanding which rules apply to your situation and using them correctly. A rental property owner who does not understand depreciation is paying more tax than the law requires. A self-employed person who has not established a SEPIRA or Solo 401k is missing a legally available tax deduction that could shelter tens of thousands of dollars annually from taxation. A business owner who has not structured their entity correctly is paying self-employment taxes on income that could be classified differently with the same legal validity. None of this is secret. All of it is legal. The information is publicly available and widely understood by accountants who specialize in working with investors and business owners. The cost of hiring a competent tax professional for 1 year is usually recovered many times over in the taxes legitimately avoided in that same year. The people who pay the most tax are not the wealthiest. They are the ones who earned without structuring. The wealthy pay less tax, legally, because they built structures that interact with the tax code intelligently. You can build those structures too, but you have to know they exist and decide to use them. Insurance is the third layer, and it is the one most people acknowledge in theory and underinvest in practice. Property insurance on your rental, liability insurance on your business, umbrella insurance that extends personal liability coverage beyond what standard policies provide. These are not luxury protections for the very wealthy. They are basic risk management for anyone who has built anything worth protecting. An umbrella policy providing $1 million in additional liability coverage typically costs $150 to $300 per year. For that amount, you extend your protection dramatically beyond the limits of your home and auto policies. In a world where a single lawsuit can generate judgments far exceeding standard coverage limits, the umbrella policy is one of the most cost-efficient protections available. Estate planning is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable for reasons beyond money. Writing a will requires you to think about your death. Establishing a trust requires you to think about who manages your assets when you cannot. These are not pleasant considerations. They are, however, essential ones. Without a will, the distribution of your assets after your death is determined by your state's intestacy laws, a generic formula that may bear no resemblance to your actual intentions. Assets may go to people you would not have chosen, in proportions you would not have selected, triggering tax consequences that a simple estate plan could have avoided entirely. A basic will and a revocable living trust, the most common estate planning structure for people with modest to moderate assets, cost a few $1,000s to establish with a competent estate attorney. They ensure that what you built goes where you intend it to go, in the structure you intend, with the people you trust managing the transition. Without them, your intentions are legally irrelevant. The beneficiary designations on your financial accounts are equally important and more frequently neglected. Your 401k, your IRA, your life insurance policies. These assets pass directly to whoever is named as beneficiary, regardless of what your will says. If your beneficiary designation is outdated, if it names an ex-spouse, a deceased parent, or simply was never completed, the asset does not go to the person you would have chosen. It goes to whoever the form says, or to your estate, where it becomes subject to probate and all the delay and expense that accompanies it. Reviewing and updating beneficiary designations takes an hour. It is among the highest return hours you will spend in your financial life. The uncomfortable truth of this chapter is that most people who have built genuine assets have not protected them adequately. They built the faucet and left the house unlocked. The building was the exciting part. The protection felt administrative, expensive, and temporally remote. Something to address when the asset was bigger, when life was less busy, when the timing was better. The timing is never better. The right moment to build the wall is before you need it. After you need it, it is too late. Wealth is not just what you earn and accumulate. It is what survives the unexpected. The lawsuit you didn't see coming. The tax bill that arrived because no one told you there was a legal alternative. The estate dispute that consumed years and legal fees because the structure was never formalized. Build the structure. Pay the professionals who know the rules better than you do. Establish the entities, the policies, the documents, and the designations that ensure your assets remain yours, and then your heirs, rather than becoming someone else's legal claim. You spent years building what you have. Spend the afternoon protecting it. Chapter 11. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what keeps working after you. Money without instruction is just inheritance. And inheritance, statistically, disappears in 3 generations. That is not a cynical observation. It is a documented pattern. The first generation builds. The second generation manages what was built, with varying degrees of competence. The third generation inherits a diminished version of something they had no hand in creating and no framework for sustaining. By the fourth generation, the wealth is statistically indistinguishable from the general population. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The phrase exists in almost every culture on Earth. Each one arrived at it independently, which suggests it describes something universal about human behavior rather than cultural accident. The reason the pattern repeats is not that subsequent generations are less capable or less intelligent. It is that wealth without the knowledge system that created it is a resource without a maintenance manual. You have handed someone a complex machine and withheld the operating instructions. The machine runs on the fuel left in the tank. When the fuel runs out, the machine stops. Nobody knows how to refuel it because nobody was taught. This is why legacy, understood correctly, is not primarily about money. It is about transferring the mental architecture that generates money. The values, the frameworks, the specific knowledge about how assets work, how cash flow is managed, how risk is evaluated, how patience interacts with compounding. These are the things that make wealth self-sustaining across generations. Without them, even a substantial inheritance is a countdown rather than a foundation. The first implication is practical and immediate. If you have children, or anyone in your life who will inherit what you build, their financial education is not supplementary to your legacy. It is the core of it. Teaching a child the mechanics of compound interest at 10 years old is a more valuable gift than any dollar amount left in a trust. Showing them how a rental property generates cash flow is more enduring than the property itself. Explaining the difference between assets and liabilities before they make their first major financial decision changes the trajectory of their entire financial life. Most parents protect children from financial complexity. This is understandable. Childhood should not be consumed by adult concerns. But there is a wide space between burdening a child with financial anxiety and simply teaching them how money works. That space is where financial literacy lives, and it is largely unoccupied in most households. A child who understands, by the time they leave home, that assets put money in your pocket and liabilities take it out, that compounding rewards patience and punishes impatience, that ownership is fundamentally different from employment, and that building systems matters more than working harder. That child carries an advantage that no school will provide and no inheritance can substitute. The knowledge is the inheritance. The money amplifies it. Now, beyond financial education, legacy requires formal structure. And this is where most people, even those who have built meaningful assets, leave enormous gaps. They have the assets. They have not documented what happens to them. A living trust is the foundational estate planning tool for anyone with assets worth protecting and intentions worth honoring. Unlike a will, which becomes a public document subject to probate, a court-supervised process that can take months or years and consumes a meaningful percentage of the estate in legal fees. A living trust transfers assets privately, quickly, and without court involvement. The assets held in the trust move to your named beneficiaries according to your instructions, typically within weeks, rather than years. The trust also allows you to specify conditions and structures that a simple will cannot accommodate. You can establish how assets should be managed if a beneficiary is a minor. You can specify that distributions are tied to specific milestones rather than delivered as a lump sum. You can name a trustee, a person or institution, to manage the assets according to your documented intentions if your beneficiaries are not yet equipped to manage them independently. This level of intentionality is not paranoia. It is precision. You built the asset with precision. The transfer of that asset should reflect the same care. A family limited partnership or family LLC can extend this structure further. These entities allow you to transfer ownership of assets to family members gradually and tax efficiently, while maintaining control during your lifetime. They create a formal structure for family financial decision-making that persists beyond any individual member's involvement. The entity becomes the container for the family's financial activity, a structure that teaches the next generation how assets are managed by including them in the management process. This is the practical mechanism of generational knowledge transfer. Not a lecture, not a document. Participation. When the next generation is involved in the management of family assets, attending meetings about the rental property's performance, reviewing the investment portfolio's quarterly results, understanding the reasoning behind financial decisions. They are learning the operating system of wealth in real time. By the time they inherit primary responsibility for those assets, they are not encountering something foreign. They are taking over something familiar. The most common objection to this level of planning is timing. People assume there is time to address it later, when the assets are larger, when the estate attorney feels more affordable, when the family conversation feels less awkward. This is the same logic that leaves investment accounts without beneficiary designations, properties without LLC protection, and business interests without succession plans. The delay costs nothing until it costs everything. The estate attorney's fee is a known, manageable expense. The cost of dying without proper structure, in legal fees, tax inefficiency, family conflict, and assets that go to unintended recipients, is unpredictable and often catastrophic. You are trading a certain small cost for protection against an uncertain large one. That is a rational trade made by everyone who understands the math. Beyond the formal structure, legacy has a dimension that resists documentation. It is the values and behavioral patterns you model during your lifetime. Children observe how you relate to money before they understand any explicit teaching about it. They notice whether money is a source of anxiety or a tool deployed with confidence. They absorb whether financial decisions in your household are made impulsively or deliberately. They internalize whether ownership is pursued or only employment. You are transmitting a relationship with money alongside whatever financial assets you accumulate. The quality of that relationship, the equanimity, the long-term orientation, the willingness to delay consumption in favor of asset building, is what determines whether the next generation uses what you leave them to build further or uses it to fund a lifestyle until it's gone. You cannot fully control this. People make their own decisions, but the environment you create and the behaviors you model are the most powerful influences on financial character that most people will ever encounter. The legacy you build in your household during your lifetime shapes outcomes far beyond any trust document or investment portfolio. There is also a dimension of legacy that extends beyond family. Businesses, institutions, knowledge systems, and communities can all be part of what you leave behind. An online business with documented systems, a trained team, and a clear operational structure can continue operating after its founder's involvement ends. The founder's knowledge has been encoded into the system. The system carries forward without requiring the founder's daily presence, or eventually, any presence at all. This is why systematizing your business is not just an operational efficiency. It is a form of legacy building. Every process you document, every system you automate, every piece of knowledge you encode into something that runs independently is a piece of infrastructure that outlasts your direct involvement. You are building something that works without you, not just for the sake of passive income now, but for the sake of continuity later. The final, most uncomfortable truth of this chapter is about the money itself. Leaving a large sum to someone who has not been prepared to receive it is not generosity. It is, statistically, a burden. Sudden wealth without financial literacy does not typically produce freedom. It produces a compressed version of all the financial mistakes that person would have made slowly over a lifetime, accelerated by the scale of available resources. The gift that endures is not the sum. It is the capacity, the knowledge, the structures, the frameworks, and the values that allow wealth to be maintained, grown, and eventually passed forward again. That is what keeps working after you are gone. That is the legacy worth building. Not what you accumulated, what you taught. Not what you left, what continued. Chapter 12. The Reinvention Imperative. Assets that don't adapt, die. Blockbuster had assets. They just stopped being the right kind. At its peak, Blockbuster operated nearly 9,000 locations, employed 60,000 people, and generated billions in annual revenue. It owned real estate, brand recognition, inventory, and customer relationships across the country. By any conventional definition, it was an asset-rich business. Within a decade, it was bankrupt. The assets did not disappear. They became irrelevant, and irrelevance, financially, is indistinguishable from loss. This is the reinvention imperative, not a motivational concept about embracing change, a cold, structural reality about how assets relate to time. An asset is not a permanent thing. It is a thing that currently generates value. When the conditions that made it valuable change, and they always change, the asset must adapt, or it ceases to function as one. Most people understand this abstractly. Most people fail to apply it to their own portfolios. They build something that works. They protect it. They manage it. And then, very gradually, they stop questioning whether it is still the right thing to be building. Comfort in what works today is the mechanism by which yesterday's asset becomes tomorrow's liability. Consider the categories where this plays out with regularity. Real estate investors who concentrated their portfolios in retail commercial properties, shopping centers, strip malls, storefronts, spent decades building what appeared to be durable, income-producing assets. The locations were real. The leases were real. The income was real. Then e-commerce restructured retail at a fundamental level, and the vacancy rates in those properties climbed steadily. The asset class did not disappear. It divided. The properties that adapted, converting to mixed-use, experiential, warehouse, or residential, continued producing income. The ones that didn't produced vacancies. The asset was never the building. It was the cash flow the building generated. When the building stopped generating cash flow, it stopped being an asset. The investors who understood this distinction adapted their holdings. The ones who were attached to the form rather than the function watched the value erode. The same dynamic applies to digital assets with even greater velocity. A YouTube channel built around a specific platform feature that gets deprecated loses a significant portion of its traffic overnight. A business that relied entirely on one social media platform for customer acquisition is structurally vulnerable to any algorithmic or policy change that platform makes. A skill set that was premium 5 years ago may be commoditized today by software that does the same thing faster and cheaper. None of these outcomes are entirely predictable, but all of them are structurally foreseeable. Every asset that depends on a single platform, a single technology, a single market condition, or a single customer relationship carries concentration risk. Concentration risk means that the failure of one thing causes the failure of everything. Diversification and adaptation are the structural responses to concentration risk. The reinvention imperative has two components. The first is monitoring. You must maintain enough awareness of the environment your assets operate in to notice when the conditions that make them valuable are shifting. This does not require daily market analysis or obsessive trend watching. It requires periodic, honest evaluation. Is this asset still performing? Is the performance trend stable, improving, or declining? Are the conditions that produce this performance likely to persist, or are there structural changes underway that suggest adaptation is necessary? Most people perform this evaluation too infrequently and too optimistically. They look at an asset that is performing adequately and conclude it is performing well. They look at a declining trend and attribute it to temporary noise rather than structural shift. The bias toward interpreting current conditions as stable is deeply human. The brain pattern matches to what it knows and resists updating the model until the evidence is overwhelming. By the time the evidence is overwhelming, the optimal adaptation window has often closed. The second component is action. Monitoring without action is just anxiety with better data. When the evaluation reveals that an asset is operating in a shifting environment, the response must be concrete. Reinvest profits into emerging areas before the current ones peak. Diversify across asset classes, geographies, and platforms so that no single structural shift can disable the entire portfolio. Acquire new skills and knowledge that maintain your ability to identify and build relevant assets as the landscape evolves. Reinvestment is the mechanism of adaptation. The income generated by current assets is the capital used to build future ones. The investor who withdraws all profit from a performing asset and consumes it is maintaining their current standard of living at the cost of their future positioning. The investor who reinvests a meaningful portion of that profit into the next asset class, the next skill set, the next platform, is continuously building forward. This does not mean chasing every new trend. The financial landscape is full of assets that appear revolutionary and prove temporary. Cryptocurrency projects, social media platforms, speculative technologies that attract enormous capital and generate enormous losses for most participants. The discipline of reinvention is not the discipline of novelty. It is the discipline of asking with genuine rigor where durable value is being created and whether your portfolio is positioned to own a piece of it. Durable value tends to concentrate around a few consistent themes. Things people will always need: shelter, healthcare, food, energy, communication. Things that reduce the cost or increase the efficiency of producing those things. Technology, automation, logistics. Things that allow people to learn, create, and connect. Education, content, platforms that facilitate human exchange. These themes evolve in their specific expression, but remain structurally relevant. The assets that capture value within them may change form significantly over decades, but the underlying demand persists. The investor who owned railroad stocks in 1900 owned transportation infrastructure. The investor who adapted to airlines in 1950 owned the same underlying demand in a different form. The one who adapted to logistics networks in 2000 continued owning the same theme. The theme is durable. The specific asset form requires periodic reinvention. There is a psychological dimension to this that is worth naming directly. Adaptation requires admitting that something you built or own is no longer optimal. That admission carries an implicit acknowledgement that your past decision, while reasonable at the time, is no longer the right one. Most people experience this as a form of failure rather than a form of learning. The emotional resistance to selling an underperforming asset, pivoting a struggling business, or abandoning a platform that no longer serves you is not irrational. It is the sunk cost fallacy operating at full strength. The money already spent, the time already invested, the identity already attached to the asset. None of these are reasons to continue with something that is declining. They are reasons that feel compelling and function as traps. The relevant question is never what you paid. It is what this asset will produce from this moment forward, relative to the alternatives. That question, asked honestly and answered without attachment to past decisions, is what drives intelligent adaptation. The reinvention imperative ultimately asks you to hold your assets with a specific kind of open-handed commitment. Committed enough to build them properly, protect them carefully, and give them time to compound. Open-handed enough to release them or transform them when the evidence suggests that continuation serves attachment more than it serves your financial future. The wealthy do not fall in love with specific assets. They fall in love with the function assets serve, generating income, building equity, preserving value, compounding wealth. When a specific asset stops serving that function adequately, they adapt without the emotional cost that paralyzes most people. Blockbuster loved its video rental stores. Netflix loved the problem those stores were solving. That distinction determined everything. Own the function. Hold the form lightly. Adapt when the evidence demands it. And never confuse the comfort of the familiar with the safety of the sound. The asset that served you yesterday is not entitled to serve you tomorrow. Earn that entitlement through continuous relevance or replace what can't. Conclusion: the shift has already happened. The question is whether you were on the right side of it. At some point in the last several decades, the rules changed, not loudly, not with an announcement. The rules changed the way most important things change, gradually, structurally, and mostly invisibly to the people most affected by them. The economy shifted from rewarding labor to rewarding ownership, from compensating effort to compensating systems, from paying people for what they did to paying assets for what they produced. The people who noticed early built portfolios. The people who noticed late scrambled to catch up. The people who never noticed are still trading hours for dollars and calling it a career. This is not a criticism. It is a description. The system was not designed to explain itself to you. It was designed to function, and it functions very well for the people positioned on the ownership side of it. For everyone else, it functions as a treadmill with better branding. You have now spent the length of this audiobook examining the mechanics of that shift. Not the inspirational version, the structural one. The one that involves specific assets, specific behaviors, specific architectural decisions that determine which side of the ownership divide you occupy. Here is what that examination reveals, stated without decoration. Most people will finish this audiobook and change nothing, not because the ideas weren't clear, because change requires a sustained discomfort that motivation cannot produce, and that only genuine decision can sustain. The gap between understanding something and restructuring your behavior around it is where most financial ambition quietly dies. The graveyard of good financial intentions is enormous and well-populated. You know this already. You have probably been in it before. What separates the people who act from the people who understand is not intelligence or information. It is the moment of genuine reckoning, the specific, uncomfortable recognition that the current path leads somewhere you do not want to go, and that no amount of working harder within that path changes the destination. If you earn income only through labor, the destination is continued labor. The salary may grow. The dependency does not change. You will work until the work stops wanting you, or until your body stops cooperating, or until an economic shift makes your specific labor less valuable than it currently is. At that point, whatever you have saved will either sustain you or it won't. And whether it does depends almost entirely on decisions made years or decades before that moment arrives. The time to build the asset is before you need it, before the job ends, before the health declines, before the market shifts, before the urgency that drives people to make desperate financial decisions instead of patient ones. The asset built under pressure performs worse than the asset built with time. Time is the one input that cannot be purchased retroactively. Every year of compounding foregone is gone permanently. Every rental property not acquired at 30 is a decade of equity and cash flow that doesn't exist at 40. Every index fund contribution not automated at 25 is a compounding cycle that no larger contribution at 50 can fully replace. This is not meant to produce regret about the past. Regret is financially useless. It is meant to produce clarity about the present moment, which is the only moment in which any decision can actually be made. So, what is the decision? Not a general commitment to doing better. A specific, structural, irreversible by design decision. The automated investment that begins this month and runs without requiring your monthly permission. The LLC formed for the business you've been running unprotected. The email list started with the knowledge you've been giving away for free. The rental property researched with the numbers rather than the aesthetics. The will written while the estate is modest enough that writing it feels unnecessary. These are not large decisions in isolation. They are small, structural commitments that compound into a fundamentally different financial life over time. Each one is a brick. You are not being asked to build a mansion today. You are being asked to lay one brick, then another, with the understanding that the mansion is not built by the person who planned the most impressive blueprint, but by the person who laid bricks consistently when it was inconvenient, unremarkable, and long before anyone could see what was being built. The shift has already happened. The economy already rewards ownership over labor. The compounding clock is already running. The gap between those who build assets and those who don't is already widening, quietly, structurally, in the background of every financial decision made and deferred. The only question remaining is a personal one, not whether the system works. It works. Not whether the assets are accessible. They are. Not whether you have enough to start. You do. The question is whether you will continue to live on the labor side of the equation, earning, spending, maintaining, and eventually running out of time. Or whether you will begin, today, the slow and unglamorous and entirely possible process of moving to the ownership side. There is no dramatic ending to that question. No trumpet. No clean resolution. Just the next decision. And the one after that. Make them differently than you have been.